hospitals in northern Gaza also targeted. Palestinians say nowhere is safe. Lina Abu Akleh, Al Jazeera.
Well, Tarek Abu Azoum is live for us in Khan Yunis in the south now. Tarek, what more can you tell us about the latest airstrike in Khan Yunis?
Yes, during the last hour, the main concentration of the Israeli airstrike has been spiked in the southern areas of the Gaza Strip, in particular in Khan Yunis city, where two residential buildings were completely destroyed in two separate airstrikes in the eastern areas of Khan Yunis. These airstrikes claimed the lives of more than 2 Palestinians, and with dozens others who have been reported injured, waiting for further rescue operations to be made to bring the people from under the rubble there. Just before a couple of minutes, just a man has been walking through this passage from and this road beside us, holding his young boy killed by the Israeli fire as he was shouting for help. As you can clearly see at the background, that the ambulances are really in a state of alert in order to carry out more rescue operations to evacuate victims from different areas that might witness bombardment within the coming hours. Also, the bombardment continue in other areas in the territory, including the northern and central areas of the Gaza Strip, as fire exchange really continue to be clearly overhead in the eastern areas of Khan Yunis and even in Rafah district as well.
Well, indeed. I mean, what else have you been seeing and hearing today in terms of casualties in the region where you are?
Yes, till now, the Israeli ongoing airstrikes had really claimed the lives of more than 10,700 Palestinians and with more than 25,000 others who have been wounded by the Israeli relentless attacks. And the lion's share for the Israeli airstrikes today was for the southern areas of the Gaza Strip, as more than 46% of these rates were concentrated on the southern areas of the territory, as what happened today in Nusayrat refugee camp and Al Braid refugee camp, besides the separate airstrikes that took place in Khan Yunis and Rafah district. These areas considered to be safe from the Israeli perspective, and people who are evacuating from the northern and central areas of Gaza Strip continue to reside in the southern areas, which also witnessed the same bombardment as what is happening on the northern areas. So literally there is no any safe place in the territory, as Israel keeps pounding different areas without any stopping till now.
And given that there are no more functional bakeries in the north, I mean, how are people coping with shortages of food?
Yes, people in the north, central and even southern areas of the Gaza Strip are facing massive deteriorations in terms of their humanitarian conditions, represented in having a very poor access to food, water and even fuel. Now we are talking in particular about the northern and central areas of Gaza City, where people are really have been under deterioration in terms of their humanitarian conditions. They don't have any drop of fuel to operate their vehicles. They were forced to line up for long hours in front of bakeries in the early beginning of this fighting, but later these bakeries were completely destroyed, as they are no longer be able to have any access to foods. They are depending on the local consumption of food in the local markets, which is also about to run out in the northern areas and central areas of the territory. Now, meanwhile, people that are really desperate and they are frustrated in terms of the Israeli ongoing exacerbation of the humanitarian crisis. They have no option just to evacuate to the southern areas, as to have a glimmer of hope that they might survive. Even the southern areas are witnessing similar conditions that are really familiar to the northern and central areas.
Okay, Tarek, thanks very much for that update. Well, top diplomats of the G7 nations have discussed the future of Gaza. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said a two-state solution was the only path to lasting peace.
No forcible displacement of Palestinians from Gaza. Not now, not after the war. No use of Gaza as a platform for terrorism or other violent attacks. No reoccupation of Gaza after the conflict ends. No attempt to blockade or besiege Gaza. No reduction in the territory of Gaza.
Well, the head of the US Central Intelligence Agency, William Burns, will visit Qatar on Thursday. He held meetings with Qatari officials to discuss the latest development in Israel's war and discuss the release of captives held by Hamas in Gaza. The director is currently on a multi-country tour of the Middle East and has visited Egypt and Israel. bring in Patty Culhane now. She joins us from Washington, D.C. Patty, so a visit by the CIA chief, realistically, what will he be hoping to achieve?
Well, I definitely want to tell you all about that, but if I could just briefly put my Pentagon correspondent hat on for the channel, I just want to let you know we just got word from Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin that the U.S. has launched an attack in eastern Syria using 2 F-15s. They said they targeted a weapons depot that was affiliated with Iranian-backed groups. So again, apologies, this is breaking news, but again, this is something we've seen. We've seen U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria be targeted with drones and rocket strikes. We saw the U.S. respond once before, but now, in fact, they said they responded yet again today in Syria. No word about how many locations, if it was more than one weapons depot or casualties, but this is, again, just breaking, just saw that from the Pentagon, and I will get more on that as it becomes available. Switching to Bill Burns. He is pretty much a very well-known figure in the Middle East. He's, of course, right now the CIA director, so people might think he's all about intelligence, but he really spent most of his career in the State Department, and he has not been to the region yet. So he's going to be able to bring a fresh perspective. He hasn't been on television like President Joe Biden or Secretary of State Antony Blinken, parroting Israeli talking points and saying there's no daylight between them. So he's going to bring a fresh perspective. So in Israel, we believe he kept pretty much his CIA hat on and was really talking about the kind of intelligence that the U.S. could provide in locating the hostages that are in Gaza and also trying to prevent another attack from going into Israel. That's obviously a big concern the Israeli officials have been using to say that they have to justify continuing this war. Then he went on to Egypt. Obviously, humanitarian aid is a big concern, and U.S. officials have been very quiet about why it is taking so long to get aid into Gaza and in such little numbers. So still working on that. Next, he'll head to Qatar, as you mentioned, and then it's going to be all about the hostages. We started to hear dribbles and drabs in the American press from unnamed sources in the last couple of days that the U.S. President Biden had told his counterpart, Prime Minister Netanyahu, on their phone call this week that he wanted to see a 3-day pause so that 10 to 15 hostages could get out, and then Hamas would provide a list of all of the living hostages still in Gaza. We heard at first that Netanyahu was very reluctant to do that, but the U.S. is very much focused on this now. You're seeing stronger statements from Biden administration officials in this than we've seen since the conflict began. After this, Jordan, United Arab Emirates, and we'll see if he takes a few more stops along the way.
Okay, with that update, Patty Culhane in Washington, D.C., thank you. Well, as Patty just mentioned, the U.S. says its Air Force has carried out strikes on a facility in eastern Syria. The Pentagon said the facility was being used by Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps and affiliated groups. Well, let's bring in William Lawrence now. He's a former U.S. diplomat and professor of political science and international affairs at the American University. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Welcome to the program. Let me ask you first, what do you make of that news in terms of strikes on eastern Syria?
Well, U.S. forces in Syria and Iraq have been hit at least 20 times. I would estimate probably more like 25 or 30 times since it began. And it's sort of a bad media talking point that, and also a foreign policy talking point that we can't escalate when, in fact, we've had bombs to and from Lebanon, to and from Syria, to from Iraq, literally since day one. And so the so-called Iranian axis of resistance has been doing small things, medium-sized things since the beginning. The question of escalation is really something else. It's, will they throw everything they have, which could jeopardize the future of Hezbollah, for example, in Lebanon, or or many things in Syria, because Syria is so fragile? Or is this going to remain a sort of tit-for-tat thing where the Israelis don't invade Lebanon again, or the Americans don't get hugely involved? So that's the question right now. Are these targeted strikes the U.S. is doing just going to be an answer saying back off? Or are we actually seeing a widening of the war, which is what a lot of people fear?
Given what you say then, what do you make of this visit by the CIA chief? What kind of discussions will be going on behind the scenes?
Well, I'm a little biased because I used to work for him. I was his Libya guy for a while. And he's just a tremendous diplomat and a tremendous person, human being. And he'll be pushing forward on all fronts, but primarily, I think, on intelligence sharing, and that's not just with Israel, with everyone. The U.S. even does some intelligence sharing with the Palestinians, so intelligence sharing and hostage negotiations and all the things connected to that. And of course, the CIA has vast resources. They are part of the intelligence community, which is 17 agencies with a huge capacity to gather intelligence. And he'll be, to some degree, trading information and proposals for hopefully concessions. It's really interesting that Biden's been talking about a 3-day pause, and U.S. officials off the records are talking about a 1 to 2 day pause when Netanyahu's been talking about 1-hour pauses. But at least we have progress in the direction of pausing the conflict, stopping the conflict, getting more humanitarian aid in. If I could chime in on the humanitarian aid point, there have been hundreds of trucks ready to go literally since the first week. What's stopping it? What can be brought in, which is an Israeli thing, and when it can be brought in, which is Israeli and Hamas thing. And the Egyptians are insisting that certain things don't happen until we get more trucks in. So that's where that is.
Okay, well, let me just jump in there, if you don't mind, forgive me, but how feasible is a ceasefire, temporary or otherwise, in the near future, in your view?
Entirely possible. There's no reason why the Israelis can't start stopping now. Netanyahu's at an hour here, an hour there. Okay, let's see. Let's get it started. I don't think that Hamas, which holds 180 hostages, and Islamic Jihad, which holds another 40 or so, and the others who hold 20, are really going to be able to or negotiate hostages for ceasefires. I don't really think that's how this is going to work. Instead, the U.S. has to come in with a package of things they need to happen, and then start negotiating timelines. And that should be hostages in exchange for hostages at some point, meaning prisoners. And since day one of this conflict, they've been talking about trading civilian women and children, and separately conversations about the elderly, literally since day one, and the injured hostages. So I think that's a better negotiation than trading hostages for ceasefires.
William Lawrence, we'll leave it there. Thank you for joining us. Well, still to come on Al Jazeera, daytime raids in the occupied West Bank. Israeli forces intensify attacks against Palestinians. You're watching Al Jazeera. Reminder of